For the sponsorship of this evening's reception, I'd like to thank the Al Haig Memorial Fund. Secretary of State Haig is Secretary of Haig, of course, combined a military and diplomatic career, so he's sort of a model for the soldier diplomat role. His work at NATO, of course, was essentially a diplomatic task. And the foundation asks that this program, this particular sponsorship, be given during President's Month, which is this month. And last year we noted Washington, and this year we note Lincoln. Someone that all of you are paying attention now to, thanks to Hollywood. But of course, for all the marvelous things we think of when we think of Lincoln, we always remember the purpose of the Civil War, which was to maintain the unity and to preserve this particular nation. And when the war was over, Lincoln spoke about binding the nation's wounds, which of course is again the theme of unity. The theme of unity when conflict was required, and a theme of unity when the devastation was over. And it isn't bad to remember that particular theme of national purpose and national unity, as sometimes our public figures, not our distinguished senators, but sometimes our public figures seem to forget in their sense of priorities. Nevertheless, it's a wonderful theme. We're glad to think of Lincoln this evening, and we do thank the Secretary Haig Memorial Fund for sponsoring the reception this evening. But our topic tonight has to do with the reaffirmation of America's leadership on human rights, with the Magnitsky affair being the thematic starting point for that. Senator Cardin has been with us before. He spoke here for the first time in 1988, a quarter of a century ago. He's spoken here a half a dozen. This will be, I think, his sixth address before this council. He's dealt with trade policy, with our strength in Europe, and the Obama foreign policy, the question of the role of the United States in world affairs, and tonight another very large theme with respect to foreign affairs. Foreign affairs, of course, and most people think of Senator Cardin for his marvelous work on a variety of causes in the Maryland legislature, in the Congress of the the House of Representatives, and again in the Senate, focusing upon questions of fiscal policy, health, environment, and others, always having an eye toward the quality of life of the citizenry, including retirement concerns. But he also serves now on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the most distinguished perhaps of all the Senate committees. And he has been a commissioner of the Helsinki Commission, the Commission for Security and Cooperation in Europe since 1993, long serving with respect to that commission. He served as the co-chairman of that commission, and I believe he still today is serving as the vice president of the OECE Parliamentary Commission, or Parliamentary Assembly. And all of you know the Helsinki Commission is for their work in human rights, which is a central theme of this evening's remarks. I don't have to remind any of you of the details of Senator Cardin's distinguished career in Maryland. I'd say there's only one thing that goes across all three of these legislative roles, the local House of Delegates and, of course, the House of Representatives and now the Senate, is that throughout all of this, he's always maintained a strong reputation for integrity, for extraordinary diligence, and for being balanced and fair-minded in his approach to public affairs. As always, it's an enormous pleasure to welcome Senator Ben Cardin.
Dr. Byrd, thank you very much. 25 years ago. Wow. Well, one thing was certain, you were here. Helen Bentley was here, and she's here again tonight, so it's good to be here with my colleague, Congresswoman Bentley. We served together back in those days and argued a good deal about foreign policy and trade, so it's good to be here. Known for a lot of things, but this week I'm known as, along with Senator Mikulski, as the senators that represent the Baltimore Ravens. That's what we're best known for. And today was pay-up day. Senator Mikulski and I wagered with Senator Feinstein and Boxer. So we collected our bet. Part of it was good. We got some good wine, some sourdough bread, and some cheese. Another part was not so great. We had to endure Dungeness crabs rather than the blue crab. So, but we let all bygones be. It was very friendly. I have, as a result of them paying off their debt, I have withdrawn my request to the Senate Select Committee on Investigation to investigate the senators from California because we think they were involved in the power failure. But I've gotten over that. I've gotten over that. We're in good shape. It's really great to be back here, and I'm glad that this council was not scheduled for Tuesday evening, because trying to get downtown Tuesday evening would have been much more problematic with the Ravens parade. And I'm glad I could get here on time. Dr. Bird knew there was a risk factor. And of all things, the storm that's up north, members had to get back to their states, so they had to leave a little bit earlier. So we got here on time. So at least there was one good thing from the storm that's coming up. I got to get here on time. Let me, again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight and talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is basically human rights. Magnitsky, Reaffirming America's Leadership in Human Rights. I want to introduce Fred Turner, who is my staff person from the Helsinki Commission, and a real champion on these issues, who really helped me a great deal. And then I also want to introduce my partner in life, Myrna, who I think many of you know, who's also with me tonight, my wife, Myrna, so for those who. So Sergei Magnitsky. Who was Sergei Magnitsky? He was a young Russian attorney. He represented an American firm doing business in Russia. And during the course of that investigation, he discovered the largest fraud in Russian history involving tax rebate scheme that a dozen of senior officials in Russia took part in, from the tax ministry, police, courts, in the old KGB. So he did what any lawyer should do. He filed a complaint saying, I've discovered this corruption. Please do something about it. Once he filed the complaint, it was forwarded to the same individuals that he accused of the crime to investigate. So they did their investigation and promptly arrested Sergei Magnitsky. Put him in pretrial detention, beat him, tortured him, and brought him near to death. He was then transferred to a prison facility that had medical treatment, so he could get medical care from his beatings and his torture. But rather than giving him any care at all, they continued to hold him in isolation, continued to beat him, and he died. He died of the torture and the way that he was treated. When he died, he was 37 years old, left a wife and 2 young sons. Now, there was great outcry when the public discovered that he had been killed, and the Russian authorities said that they would do a thorough investigation. Immediately, they targeted the firm that Sergei Magnitsky was representing. Their founding partner, who was an American, had to flee Russia in order for his own personal safety. The people responsible for the crimes were promoted. And now, 3 years later, The Russian authorities are threatening to try Sergei Magnitsky, even though he's dead, for the crimes that others have committed. So who was Sergei Magnitsky? A young Russian whose patriotism towards his country that he loved required him to report corruption. He believed that the fall of the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union was the dawn of individual freedom in Russia that would allow Russians to truly become a democratic state. So why should we care? Why should we care about this Russian? Well, we are Americans, and we can make a difference. We can advance democratic values. Other countries will follow U.S. leadership. It is in our interest, not just to advance basic rights, human rights, which are American values, we believe universal values, but it's in our national security interest to advance human rights. As we've seen in so many other places in the world where there's little respect for human rights, there's little chance of stability. Which brings me to the Helsinki Commission. The Helsinki Commission was established in 1975 by an act of Congress. It was the United States' participation in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, consisting of every country in Europe, the former Soviet Union, now all the former republics of the Soviet Union, the United States and Canada. And it had three basic baskets. One was human rights, which is probably its best known. The other was economic security. And the third is defense, military security. And the recognition here is that each one of these baskets are individually important for a nation to be stable and secure. You're not going to have stability unless you treat your people well, unless you have an economic future, unless you are secure from foreign attack. But it also recognized that each of these baskets are interrelated, that you're not going to have economic prosperity unless you treat your people fairly, that you can't provide the military security unless you respect economic security. And you're not going to be able to keep your country calm unless you have an economic future for your people. It is a consensus organization. There is no way that we could take a violator of these principles to court. What we do is we put a spotlight on them. They don't like that. They don't like to be held up to violate Helsinki principles. The United States participates in the Helsinki, on the OSCE through the Helsinki Commission, and Dr. Bird, I now have the chairman, since it rotates every 2 years, to be the chairman of the Helsinki Commission. Its work is particularly known in human rights, and let me just give you a few examples of what we have been able to do, the United States, through its work in the Helsinki Commission, to advance human rights globally. Trafficking, modern-day slavery, young children being trafficked from one country to another, usually for prostitution, but for other purposes as well. The United States took the leadership to say that we would not tolerate that. And not just the origin countries where these people come from, but also the destination countries that have wealth and fund these type of operations, as well as transit countries, that we wouldn't allow this to happen, that we would take action. And through congressional action and through U.S. action, we now have what's known as the TIP reports, trafficking in persons, where the United States names countries that are not doing the right thing. Now that causes some diplomatic challenges. When we put in writing a report saying that you are not doing what you can do to stop trafficking, but we do it. And it's the right thing. And I could tell you how many ambassadors have been in my office saying, what can we do to get off of the wrong tier on this issue? It's made a huge difference. We include the United States on the TIP report. We're not perfect. So we evaluate what we do to combat trafficking in persons. The Helsinki Commission takes seriously charges against the United States that we're in violation to the Helsinki principles. I took the leadership on Guantanamo Bay and the facility that we had there to open it up to demand that our government allow OSCE participants to visit Guantanamo Bay and see firsthand and ask firsthand their questions and see whether we couldn't develop some international standards on how to handle the detainees during this new war on terrorism. So it's worked. It's made a difference. We've used the Helsinki process to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance. We've made huge differences with Special Representative that we're now developing best practices. And yes, we have problems of tolerance around the world, including the Helsinki regions, but we have government leaders taking leadership positions, learning from each other to try to combat it. We've made a huge difference. The Roma population of Europe. Myrna and I have visited many of the Roma camps. These are gypsies that very few people care about, but we do. In the United States, the Helsinki Commission's made a huge difference. But let me get to corruption, because corruption is a problem that we have a long way to go, and we're working hard. In the developing world, we yet generally use international development assistance to try to deal with developing countries' capacity. We use it to advance our rights. You know, our national security budget includes our national defense, our international development assistance, and our foreign diplomacy. International development assistance and foreign diplomacy is less than 1% of the federal budget. It's a very small part, but it plays a very important role. So we use our development assistance to advance gender equity issues, to fight corruption, to make sure that the funds get to the people to help. And we are developing a zero tolerance. As badly as a country may need development assistance, if it's not going to help the people, if it's going to fuel corruption, then we should pull out. And we got to be prepared to do that. In the last Congress, or shortly before that, along with Senator Lugar, I offered legislation that established transparency in the extractive industries. Many of these countries in the developing world have a lot of resources. We call it the resource curse, in which their corrupt leaders make contracts with extractive industries, companies such as oil, gas, copper, diamonds, and take the money for their own purpose rather than for their country's purpose. Well, no longer. Under the Cardin-Lugar provisions, these extractive industries must list their individual contracts with their stock filings so we can see. The oil industry's taking us to court. Why? Because they know if they can do a corrupt contract with a corrupt leader, it will cost them less money. But it's in our interest to make sure the resources get to the people so that they have an economic future, so they have a stable regime for us, less military that we need to use. We're making a difference. We're making a difference. Corruption and human rights, we also challenge in the developed countries. And that's where Sergei Magnitsky came in. We expected more from Russia. It's important to put a face on the issue. You know, we talk about corruption, everybody says, oh, well, it exists. But when you see the face of what happened to Sergei Magnitsky, you can bring about change. Millions of people died in the Holocaust. But Anne Frank personalized it to Americans, something that we could relate to. Millions of Jews were trapped in the former Soviet Union, but the refuseniks, such as Natan Sharansky, brought it to the world stage. We wore the bracelets with the names of the refuseniks. It personalized the issue. I'm sure there was some saying in the 1970s and the 1980s, who is this Natan Sharansky, and why should we care? We cared because we could make a difference and did make a difference in freeing Soviet Jews from the Soviet Union. We learned a lot about Sergei Magnitsky during a hearing before the Helsinki Commission in 2009 that I chaired. It was the Medvedev thaw, is it real, will it last? At that time, Sergei Magnitsky was in prison, and we had hoped to do something to try to save him. But very shortly thereafter, he died in prison. I took action. I wrote a letter to Secretary Clinton. I said to Secretary Clinton, we know who was involved. We got the names. Let's put these people on a list so they can't come to America. Let's hold up their bank accounts because, quite frankly, They don't want rubles, they want dollars. So let's do something where we can really hurt them. Now, this was during the time that Secretary Clinton had many things on her agenda, and I understand that. The restart button with Russia and all these other things, and that's why we have an independent legislature. We have an independent legislature because we can initiate. It's not just what the president or administration does. So I filed legislation known as the Magnitsky bill to deny the perpetrators of this tragedy the right to visit our country, which they wanted to do because they had family here, the right to use our banking system because they wanted to keep the money. We knew their money was in our banking system, and we thought that was wrong. I'm proud of the co-sponsors I had. A Republican by the name of John McCain. You may have heard his name. The ranking Republican on the Armed Services Committee. Democrat by the name of Senator Richard Durbin. Number 2 Democrat in the United States Senate who chairs the Human Rights Subcommittee on the Judiciary Committee. Senator Kyle from Arizona, the number 2 Republican in the United States Senate. Senator Shaheen, Democrat, who chairs the European Subcommittee on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Wicker, a Republican, who's the ranking Republican on the Helsinki Commission with me. Senator Lieberman, was he a Democrat or Republican? One of the two. But we had strong bipartisan support and many, many others. The reaction in Russia? They called it the Cardin list. I was flattered. The people are on that list. It helped reinvigorate the democratic opposition, and they took to the streets to help protest what the Russian government had done to Sergei Magnitsky. I had many Russians who visited in my office and wrote me and said, look, you're doing the right thing. Stick with it. Russia can do better. They should do better. We had reactions in many other capitals around the world supporting the effort, saying, look, if you can get it done in the United States, we'll follow you in our country because it's the right thing. Our objective was not to pass the bill. Our objective was to get Russia to change, to take responsibility for its own citizens. That's what we wanted to do. We wanted the rule of law. Well, what is the rule of law? There's a distinction here between what is in a constitution or the laws you pass and how they are enforced. And yes, you may have laws that pretend to provide protection, but do they really do that? Let me just share with you a meeting I had 2 weeks ago in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, as Dr. Bird has pointed out. And we have these incredible opportunities where we will meet with world leaders in a small setting, in a private setting, without cameras going, where we have a chance to ask questions. On one such occasion 2 weeks ago, I had a chance to meet with Chen Guangchong, a person who used to live in China. He challenged in 2006 Chinese one-child forced abortion policy. He did this by filing a legal challenge because he read the Constitution and laws of China. He filed a legal challenge. He says, I'm allowed to do that under Chinese law. Well, like Sergei Magnitsky, he was almost immediately put into prison. No one could contact him. He was tortured. And for the next 6 years, he was tortured. He was in and out of prisons. He was under home arrest. And thanks to the United States of America, he escaped through our embassy and is now in America over the protests of the Chinese government. We saved him. I asked him, well, what happened? He says there's a huge difference between laws and the rule of law. China has the laws. They don't have the rule of law. Because you see, when I filed that petition, there was a member of the Communist Party who told the judge whether he could consider the matter or not. And the member of the Chinese Party said, what, this is something wrong here, took it to the police and had me arrested because the Communist Party is above the law. There is no rule of law. I said, what should we do? How can the United States help? And this is exactly what he said. You should not give in to the standing up for basic human rights. Should not give in 1 inch. His family is still in China and still under grave risks. And he understands that their future depends upon the United States of America. Well, we had an opportunity to advance the Magnitsky Bill because of Russia's desire to enter the World Trade Organization, trade issue. You see, we have this so-called Jackson-Vanik law that's out there that says that these non-market economies are not entitled to the best tariff schedule with the United States unless they have free immigration, and then only with the president waiving the applications of the Jackson-Vanik law. And for years, we've waived those provisions for Russia because they no longer prevent immigration. But we had to repeal the basic law in order for us to be in compliance with the World Trade Organization so that Russia and the United States both would be bound by the World Trade Organization rules. It was in our interest to have Russia in the World Trade Organization. But quite frankly, a lot of us are not interested in repealing a human rights tool unless we get another human rights tool in place. So it gave us an opportunity to move the Magnitsky Bill. It was the right marriage between human rights and trade. Now, there's some who say no, but think back in history. What was the first thing that moved South Africa apartheid government to collapse? And it was sanctions, trade sanctions, where the United States showed leadership. Other countries followed us. Well, I remember in those days, a lot of people saying that would be not a good idea, that all you were going to do was to hurt the blacks of South Africa. We just pointed to Nelson Mandela and say, no, that's not true. And then in the Soviet Union, the Jackson-Vanik laws, that we would deny the Soviet Union most favored nation status if they did not allow their people to emigrate and leave their country. So there have been naysayers about this. When Jackson-Vanik passed the Congress of the United States, President Nixon vetoed it. He says, don't mess around with trade. So he vetoed it. National Security Advisor Kissinger said it would backfire. U.S. businesses said, why are you hurting us? That's what we heard. But we also heard from the Soviet dissident and Nobel Peace Prize winner, Andrei Sakharov. In an open letter that he wrote in September 1973 to Congress, urging the passage of Jackson-Vanik, he said to reject Jackson-Vanik would amount to a betrayal of the thousands of Jews and non-Jews who want to emigrate, and the hundreds in camps and mental hospitals, and the victims of the Berlin Wall. It would be tantamount to total capitulation of democratic principles in the face of blackmail, deceit, and violence. Consequences of such capitulation for international confidence, détente, and the entire family of mankind are difficult to predict. Natan Sharansky said it a little bit more direct. Jackson-Vanik played a major role in the Soviet collapse. So one person, Sergei Magnitsky, is he worth all this attention? Robert Kennedy, in one of the, I think, most famous speeches before the University of Cape Town in June of 1966, talked about individual efforts. He said, each time a man stands up for the ideals or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. Those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Sergei Magnitsky's ripple has become a current for change. On December 14th, 2012, the Magnitsky Act became law, hailed by human rights activists in Russia and around the world. But that was not the case with the Russian authorities. They took action to stop American adoption of Russian orphans, particularly those with special needs. They used orphans as human shields to protect corrupt officials. It is sickening and morally reprehensible. There have been protests in Russia. It's not the first time that the Russians have used their adoption laws to try to blackmail the United States. And it's not the first time they've tried to use intimidation to get their way. After the passage of Jackson-Vanik in 1975, emigration of Soviet Jews dropped dramatically for the next 3 years. We're not going to be intimidated. We're going to stand strong. If those in Russia and those in China and those in other countries at great personal risk are not going to be deterred in standing up for human rights, we are not going to be deterred on standing up for human rights. We're going to continue to help restore adoption policies in Russia because we care about those orphans and we know that we can do the right thing. So there are protests going on and there are congressional strategy sessions going on. We're going to advance adoption rights and we're going to advance human rights, but we're not going to choose. Both are important. The Magnitsky standard should be global. Jackson-Vanik applied to all market economies, not just the Soviet Union. The bill that I filed in the Congress of the United States applied to all countries, not just Russia. It was amended to apply only to Russia. Those who violate internationally recognized human rights standards and the country in which they live, protect them, should be denied visas and banking privileges, whether it happens in Russia or any other place in the world. Magnitsky reaffirmed America's global leadership on human rights. 11 parliaments, including Canada, are taking up Magnitsky-type bills as we speak. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly took up the Magnitsky issue and voted to support this type of legislation. The Council of Europe has taken up this issue. Several countries are tracing assets because they recognize the assets don't belong to the corrupt officials, they belong to the people of Russia, and they will seize those assets when they're found. Well, why should we care? Because we're Americans and we can make a difference. Hillary Clinton just last week said, America must continue to be the indispensable nation and the global leader on behalf of peace, prosperity, and progress. That requires us not only to lead alone, but also to build coalitions and networks that will put responsibility with others and expect them to play their role in a rules-based global order. Yesterday, Myrna and I had the opportunity to see Secretary of State Kerry take the oath of office as our Secretary of State. He said yesterday, America is exceptional not because we say we are, not because of a birthright that will happen automatically, but because America does exceptional things. We must continue to do these things. The world depends on us. Jimmy Carter said, human rights are our soul of our foreign policy because human rights is the very soul of our state sense of nationhood. So why did I care about Sergei Magnitsky? Yes, because I'm a citizen of the world, but I just happen to be a United States Senator, one of 100. And I'm in the position where I can, and I did advance human rights. The photo that you see here is a reminder to me and will be in my office. It reminds me not just of Sergei Magnitsky, that's President Obama signing the bill that put Magnitsky Act into law. You'll see Steny Hoyer in that photograph, a former chair of the Helsinki Commission, a great leader on behalf of human rights. You'll see Mark Levin there, the head of the National Committee for Soviet Jews. So when I see that photo, I also will think of Natan Sharansky. And I'll think of Chen Chong-chem. I'll think of Nelson Mandela. But I also will think of the millions of people around the world whose names we don't know, who look to us to stand up by the soul of our nationhood, human rights, so they can have a future for their children. I intend to do all I can to answer that call. Thank you. Now, I know it's a tradition here to take questions, so just be gentle. This has been a long week. Yes, I'm going to repeat the questions because I understand you need that for the video that's being done. And the question deals with problems we have here in the United States. You speak about what's happening around the world. How about problems we have with prostitution right here, with problems with people being killed under the authority of government? How about speaking out about that? There's a huge difference here, and I needed to draw the distinction so people understand that. The huge difference is that we do have rule of law here in America. We do have a system that you can stand up and use, and you're not going to be thrown in prison for doing that. We have a system that's independent judiciary, and it is an independent judiciary. And you can make your points, and you can organize, and you can do this without fear of intimidation in the United States of America. But having said that, I don't disagree with the thrust of your point. I've said when I was talking about the trafficking, when I was talking about torture and what happened in Guantanamo Bay, we made mistakes. We did things that were wrong. I did everything I can to bring that to the attention. So I think we have to be very much mindful of what we do at home. Because before we can take the international stage, before we can be the nation that tells the world you got to do better, we got to take care of business at home. So you're absolutely right about your point, but I don't want anyone to draw a comparison between what's happening in Russia today and what's happening in the United States, because that comparison would be totally false. Yes. The question is, there's been a long history of Russia as a country, part of the Soviet Union, of repression and being totally tone deaf to the opinion of the international community. Why do you think this all of a sudden will impact Russia? And I have a couple answers to that. First, the United States wants to be on the right side of history. The Russian people know what's going on in Russia. They're on our side. You start to see what's happening at the polls on elections, and you're seeing a huge change. It wasn't too long ago that Putin was very, very popular. About 70, 80% of the Russians favored him. He's now probably below 50%. So his popularity is being diminished. We see in countries that are not democratic states where popular opinion, particularly in this day of the internet, is becoming a major factor. We're seeing regimes that are falling. And I tell you, I think we can have an impact on Russia. Russia wants to be a significant country. It is a significant country. It wants to be a player on the international stage. It signed up. No one told them they had to the Helsinki Principles. That was a voluntary act. Part of that, of joining the Helsinki Final Act, is that you give every other nation that has signed that accord the right to challenge what you're doing. So we have that right under a document signed by Russia. So this is we're not interfering with the rights of other countries. We have an obligation to do this. So I hear what you're saying, and I do think we will have an impact. And I go back to the Robert Kennedy quote. Sometimes you don't realize the impact you have. It starts with small action, but it can bring about huge change. Look what happened with Arab Spring. I'm sure that one protester in Tunisia didn't think that everything would happen after what that person did. But look what happened. Look what happened with the fall of Mubarak in Egypt. Look what's happening in Syria today with President Assad. Countries that thought they were insulated from the international and that they could control the security of their country failed the basic test of Helsinki. You're not going to have security in your country unless you respect the rights of your citizens and you provide them the economic opportunities for a future. Yes? The question deals with Russia's reaction on adoption and on beef imports. They're not going to be able to do the beef imports. They're now under the World Trade Organization, so there's certain, they will be held accountable if they try to deal with provisions that would be inconsistent with their obligations under the World Trade Organization. Quite frankly, we expect the adoption issues to change. This is not the first time that they have exercised this. And we do think that, quite frankly, I hate to say it in this terms, but we're not sure that they really want children who are orphans who have special needs. So and that's a large number of the children we're talking about. And there are American families who want these children and want to love these children and do what's right. So we think that in time you'll see a change here. And there's some, so we don't have to do, two wrongs don't make a right. We do the right thing. We stand up for right principles. We're going to prevail. Yes. Well, let me give you high marks for the creative way that you connected the theme to Senator Hagel's nomination. I thought that was done very well. The question involves Senator Hagel's nomination to be Secretary of Defense and the contract to provide the F-16s, is that what it is, to Egypt. I'm not that familiar with the Egypt military contract, but I'll try to give you the parameters of both answers. Senator Hagel's nomination will not be voted on until next week. It is controversial for several reasons. I think at the end of the day that he will be confirmed. The overwhelming majority of the members of the Senate believe that the President is entitled to an up or down vote, that this should not be something that's filibustered. We are trying to use the filibuster less in the United States Senate. One of the bright spots of this Congress was at the beginning, a bipartisan group, which I was part of, worked out changes in the Senate rules that will allow nominations to come up much more quickly and allow bills to get to the floor of the Senate without being filibustered. So we accomplished, we think, some good things for Democrats and Republicans working together. So I believe Senator Hagel's nomination will be on the floor of the Senate shortly for an up or down vote. And I believe there are over 50 senators who will support his nomination, just listening to the general conversation that has been among my colleagues. I have yet to decide how I will vote on Senator Hagel, and it has to, I know Senator Hagel well. I respect him. He is a good person. I have great respect for his independence and his commitment to public service. As I said when he was nominated, I just don't know this is the right position, where he's one of just a handful giving advice to the President on national security issues. I have not yet decided how I will vote on his nomination. On Egypt, Egypt is very important to the United States as a strategic country. It's just so we understand that. We have a very, very large footprint in Egypt, well beyond just the bilateral relationships between our two countries. So it may be necessary for us to look for other strategic partners, but at this point, it's an important country for us. It's a country that has made peace with Israel, and that's an important ally and has maintained its peace agreements over change of regime with Israel. They've also worked with us on fighting extremism, and they have to date. They've worked, so there's been some sharing of information. Our most reliable institution in Egypt is their military. Their political leadership, we'll see. There's been some things said that I have a hard time in following for any country I want to do business with. But the Egyptian military and the American military have a very close working relationship. And historically, the military has had significant power within Egypt. So it's really too early to make, I think, a prediction. I'm not familiar with this specific arms sale, so I really can't answer that. I was not aware of that contract. I will go back and take a look at it. In the back? Yes. The question is, if this corruption is so high up in the Russian authority, how do you counter that? How do you, what policies can work? And I want to make this clear. The Magnitsky case demonstrates corruption is widespread. It doesn't show us how high up the ladder of that corruption goes. I don't want to infer corruption at the highest levels in the Russian government, because I have no knowledge of that. I do know that there was corruption at the levels that I've talked about. And I do know that this has been brought to the attention at the highest levels, and they have not taken action, even though they said they would, to do an independent investigation. In fact, there's been some independent investigations done within Russia that verify exactly what I'm saying. And yet they still took no legal action against the perpetrators, in fact, promoted the perpetrators of the crime. So you can make certain, but I have no reason to tell you that I think that the corruption's at the highest level. I think that Mr. Putin wants to stay in power. I think he has tried to develop a way that he can stay in power. I think Mr. Medvedev was really sincere in trying to bring about change. He had no power to do it. That Mr. Putin has been the power person in Russia, and it is today. And I think he won't change unless he thinks he has to. And some of the things we're doing is pointing out that he has to change. Yes. The question deals with gender equity issues. You mentioned specifically the problems with prostitution and trafficking. You also mentioned the cultural bias of some countries against women. How do you counter that? Well, it is a prime focus of our international development assistance is to deal with gender equity issues. There was no greater champion of those causes than Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. She developed numerous initiatives. Administrator Shaw, I was the chair of the International Development Assistance Subcommittee during the last Congress, working with Administrator Shaw to develop specific programs to help women. I'm going to make a couple comments which I think are absolutely factual. The way a nation treats its women will be a good barometer as to how successful that nation's going to be. Look, I fortunately have a 6-year term, so you can't vote me out right now for a woman, but women will make better decisions. They invest in their children. They invest in future. They don't invest in war. They invest in health care. So the way you treat women is extremely important. Now, how do we go about it? In most of the developing world, the #1 issue on the economic front is land ownership, because they're agricultural societies. Women provide the overwhelming labor, farm labor in these countries, and get a pittance of the income from the land. So part of our strategy is to change land ownership and how women are treated in the economic fiber of a country. And Myrna and I, in visiting Morocco, visited some of our Peace Corps workers and how they were teaching women who were very creative not to give their work away, but to organize it and get the profits of their work. So organizing that. In Afghanistan and in Iraq, where women were treated horribly, we stood up and demanded changes be made. And a large part of our effort has been to make sure women are educated, that they're part of the government now, and they are part of the government now. They weren't before. So the United States has stood up for gender equity because it's the right thing. We believe in it. It's part of our DNA that this is what we should do. But we also look at it as very important for stable countries to make sure that their women are properly treated in their society from the point of view of basic rights and economic rights. Yes. The question deals, we got to do a better job in Maryland on dealing with sex trafficking, because we have prostitution here and we're not doing everything we need to do to protect women in our own state of Maryland. We got to do more. The first point I want to make is that in the last couple decades, we've changed the whole concept of women as being just, this is what they do, to being victims. And it's made a huge difference in the United States as around the world. So we are trying to rescue women. Before, we used to prosecute women. We're trying to rescue, we're trying to give them the services that they need, we're trying to protect them and give them a way of life. Housing, social needs, medical needs, economic needs. We're doing that in Maryland, and we are setting up capacity around the world. We have on the floor of the United States Senate right now the Violence Against Women Act, and we're going to pass that on Monday. Part of that deals with the issue you're talking about. It's not just domestic violence, although domestic violence is a huge part of it. 1 out of every 4 women sometime in their lifetime will be a victim of domestic violence. That's the United States of America numbers. So this is a huge problem. And you're right that we have to recognize that and do something about it. And it starts with political leadership. It starts with educating law enforcement so that they understand what victims are all about and will treat a person as a victim rather than as a criminal. And it requires resources and how we allocate resources in order to provide the services that are needed. Yes. The question deals with the help for Native Americans and their sovereignty that was supposedly guaranteed at different times by treaties and by other legal documents. Let me try. I mean, this is an issue that is extremely complicated. I listen and read a lot about it because I have to vote on the floor of the United States Senate. And although we have issues with Native Americans in Maryland, it's not as large of an issue as it is in many other states around the nation. So I try to get better informed on this issue. So I am reading a lot about it, and it's an evolving issue. Let me just make a couple general comments. Over the history of America, we've treated some people very badly. We treated Native Americans badly. We treated African Americans badly. We treated Japanese Americans badly. And when we corrected the mistake, it took us even a much longer time to deal with trying to make the person whole who we took away so much of their life. So it took us a long time to pass an acknowledgement when the Japanese Americans, I was in the Congress when we did it, so it was many, many years after the internment camps were closed before we got around to dealing with this. And as you know, slavery is, the remnants of slavery have yet to be fully eliminated in America from the point of view of all the issues involved. As far as Native Americans, that's also true. But again, it's a much more complicated issue because there are not as many enclaves of individuals who want to live on Native American land, but there's a lot of people that are Native Americans. So how do you deal with the protected properties as well as the protected services? And it's an issue that does require us to recognize that there are obligations that have to be adhered to. Yes? This is a great point that you make, and it's the point I want to underscore, and the point is that it's a lot easier for the United States and less expensive to make peace, to make sure people have clean water, that they have an economic future, that they can live without fear of intimidation, than it is to send our military to clean up the mess afterwards. And I agree with you completely. I want to just give the Obama administration credit in this area. The Obama administration said we're going to have a national security strategy. Before the Obama administration, we had a national defense strategy, we had a diplomacy strategy, we had a foreign aid strategy, and the turf was rarely shared. And the defense very much defended any effort in a war country to provide anything, any assistance had to go through them. And the State Department said, we don't want to talk to the soldiers, basically. And President Obama changed that all around. We now have a national security team that includes the State Department's efforts for aid and diplomacy and our national defense through the Department of Defense. And we do evaluate all these different issues. It's interesting as we have transitioned our troop numbers in Iraq and Afghanistan, at the same time there were decisions made as to what we do with foreign aid in these countries. And we were able to have a faster acceleration of our redeployment because we substituted instead foreign aid. Now, this was at some risk because there were Americans over there doing work. And it was, I think, the right strategy. Now, I don't want to get into all the politics of Iraq and Afghanistan, but I do believe that we did the right thing in trying to maintain stability in that country by other than using soldiers. some of the other points that we're raising about gender equity issues and all the other matters were also brought into play through the use of international development assistance. So, for those of you who agree with this, fight for these budgets. They're small. They're really small. I mean, with our foreign development assistance, we handle a huge food program. HIV/AIDS, the United States is in the leadership on health issues. We do emergency humanitarian aid, as you know, when there's a problem somewhere in the world. So we do an awful lot with a little bit of money. And when you try to do a new initiative, it's very difficult to have the funds to do it. And if we're going to face sequestration on March 1st, you're going to see huge cuts, including in our foreign aid budget, amounting to about 8% of the total budget. That means a lot of these programs are going to be terminated, which is not good. I'm not going to try to summarize that question because I think it was more of a comment, but it's true. Our military are doing incredible things. They are not just shooting rifles. They are providing help, including economic assistance to the countries in which they serve. And it's at great personal risk. This is not without their targets. Make no mistake about it. And we have tried to transition so that there's stability in that country. Whether you were for or against the war in Iraq, I was against it, but whether you're for or against it, we have a responsibility to make sure that when we leave, that we do the best we can so that the people there have a chance for an economic future. The same thing's true in Afghanistan. So we are doing that. Our soldiers are working with the State Department, and it's not, as I said, this is the national security team, and it really is seamless between defense and state, and that's the way it should be. You all have raised great questions about problems we have here in America and around the world. Bottom line is that we all need to be attentive to the development of human rights. I look at the Magnitsky law, I look at Sergei Magnitsky as giving us a way to advance globally, including here in America, standards that we expect government leaders to respect the rights of their citizens. And when someone's rights are violated, they will allow the system to hold the perpetrators responsible. That's the simple message of what we were trying to do with Sergei Magnitsky. As I said earlier, the purpose was to get Russia to change. Yes, I'm frustrated that Russia has not changed. I believe one day Russia will change because the Russian people will demand a change in Russia. The Russian history is one of a great nation. I take a little bit of exception about them always being bad. No, they weren't. They have had great times in their history, great developments that they've made. And I believe they will return to those days. Iran, as we know, was a great nation at one time. And it's being led by wrong leaders today. And their leaders are on the wrong side of history, and the people of Iran will change their government. Syria is in the process of changing their government. So America should be on the right side of history and help human rights advocates around the world who really are strong people and look to America as their friend, and we are their friend. Thank you all very much.